You wake up in the dark. Your head is pounding. A fever burns behind your eyes. You reach for a plastic bottle of pills. But what if those pills did not exist? For almost all of human history, they did not. When ancient humans got sick, they faced a terrifying reality. There were no hospitals. There were no pharmacies. You were completely at the mercy of nature. But the real answer is far stranger. Our ancestors were not just waiting around to die. They were practicing complex medicine tens of thousands of years ago, and their methods would genuinely shock you today. How did they know what to do without science? Let us start with something that sounds like a nightmare. Trepanation. It is the oldest surgical procedure known to humanity. Ancient doctors would literally scrape a hole into a living patient's skull. They used sharpened stones. They used no modern anesthesia. Why would anyone agree to this? You might assume it was a crude ritual to let out evil spirits. But archaeological evidence shows something much more practical. Many of these skulls show signs of severe blunt force trauma. The skull was cracked. The brain was swelling. Trepanation was an emergency surgery to relieve cranial pressure. And the most mind-blowing part is that it worked. We know this because the bone around the holes shows extensive healing. These patients did not just survive the surgery. They lived for years afterward. Could you survive brain surgery in a cave? But surgery is only one part of the story. The real secret of ancient medicine was hidden in plain sight. It was growing all around them. Plants. You probably think of herbal medicine as folk remedy. But to ancient humans, it was a highly advanced chemical armory. They did not have laboratories to isolate active compounds. They had thousands of years of brutal trial and error. And they discovered things that modern medicine is still using. Consider the Neanderthals. For a long time, we thought they were just primitive brutes. But a researcher named Laura Weyrich changed that completely. She analyzed the dental plaque of ancient Neanderthals found in Spain. One specific male had a massive dental abscess. He was also suffering from an intestinal parasite. He was in agonizing pain, but his teeth revealed something extraordinary. He had been chewing on the bark of a poplar tree. Poplar bark contains salicylic acid. That is the exact active ingredient in aspirin. He was chemically treating his own pain. But he did not stop there. Weyrich also found traces of penicillium on his teeth. Penicillium is the mold that produces penicillin. This Neanderthal was taking natural antibiotics 50,000 years ago. How did a supposedly primitive creature discover antibiotics? The answer goes back deeper than human history. Dr. Ronald Siegel spent his career studying how animals self-medicate. He found that chimpanzees swallow specific rough leaves to clear parasites. Pregnant elephants eat specific trees to induce labor. The instinct to find medicine is biologically hardwired into us. Our ancestors watched the animals. They observed what the wolves and bears ate when they were sick. They copied them. They tasted the bitter roots. They learned which plants healed and which ones killed. And they passed that knowledge down through stories. But medicine is not just about what you ingest. Sometimes a body is simply broken. Broken bones in the wild should be a death sentence. If you cannot walk, you cannot gather food. If you cannot run, you are prey. But the fossil record tells a completely different story. We have found countless ancient skeletons with perfectly healed fractures, femurs that were snapped cleanly in half, bones that were meticulously set back into place. This requires someone else to physically align the bone. It requires someone to bind it with splints. It requires weeks of immobilization. Who is bringing them food while they heal? This brings us to the most powerful medicine our ancestors ever invented. It was not a plant. It was not a surgical technique. It was community. In the 1950s, Dr. Ralph Selecki excavated a cave in Iraq. It was called Shanidar Cave. He found the remains of a Neanderthal known as Shanidar I. This man had lived a brutal life. He had suffered a crushing blow to his head early in life. The injury likely left him partially blind. His right arm had been amputated above the elbow. He had a severe degenerative condition in his legs. He could not hunt, because ancient humans understood something that we often forget. Survival is not an individual sport. When you got sick, your greatest asset was the person sitting next to you. They were your hospital. They were your life support system. And this impulse to care for the sick is universally human. It shows up in every ancient culture we have ever studied. The ancient Egyptians had entire medical texts dedicated to healing. The Ebers Papyrus contains hundreds of herbal prescriptions. But before they ever wrote it down, the knowledge was oral. It was whispered around the fires at night. If your child had a fever, you knew exactly which bark to strip. If your brother was wounded, you knew which moss stopped the bleeding. Sphagnum moss is highly acidic. It prevents bacterial growth. Ancient humans packed it into deep wounds. We used that exact same moss during World War I for bandages. Thousands of years later, we are still relying on their discoveries. But what happened when the medicine failed? What happened when the fever did not break? When the herbs and the splints and the community were not enough? Ancient humans did not just abandon their sick. They transitioned from medicine to comfort. They used fire to keep them warm. They used touch to keep them grounded. The placebo effect is a real physiological phenomenon. When a shaman performed a healing ritual, it was not just theater. The ritual reduced stress. It lowered cortisol levels. It signaled to the patient's immune system that help had arrived. And sometimes, that psychological shift was enough to save a life. Are our modern doctors really so different? The white coat, the sterile room, the confident voice. It is all part of the same ancient healing ritual. We are just using different props. We look back at ancient humans and think they were primitive. We imagine them dying helplessly from minor infections. We think they lived in constant terror of disease. But the truth is much more resilient. They fought back with everything they had. They mapped the chemical properties of entire forests. They invented surgery with stones. They cared for their weak when it made no economic sense. Every time you recover from a cold, you are standing on their shoulders. Your immune system learned its lessons in the dirt of the Pleistocene. You are the descendant of the ones who figured it out. So think about that tonight. You wake up in the dark, shivering, but you are not alone.